Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Nora, and on today's video we are playing some Palia. Today I'll be sharing 3 different layouts using the new Terraform items and landscape items that we just got with the new Palia update. The first idea is going to use a ton of Terraform, and it's going to be a overgrown forest kind of vibe. I'm also going to include a more detailed idea in this video, as well as a simple version for those who are short on coins. Today's video is also going to be a little bit of a different style because this is so much building and content. I'm going to do the main layout and then transition to how it's fully decorated. I just wanted to disclaim this just because it is a little bit different than my usual type of speed build content. Anyways, the great thing about these Terraform pieces is they can kind of merge together and you can do a lot of layering with them. So this means after all the layering, I'll be able to create a really nice overgrown forest kind of look because of how this Terraform works. Once I finish up the main landscape over here, then we'll go ahead and transition to how everything looks completely decorated. And of course, as always, I hope that the ideas today bring you some much needed inspiration, and let me know your favorite one in the comment section below. After I finished layering the Terraform and decorated with different flowers and trees, here is how the build looks completely decorated. I thought a great centerpiece for this build would be a pathway that kind of forms a circle-like effect, and then I did this little cluster of greenery and a tree in the center, and I just think that this really added such a nice overgrown touch to the build. I think this would be a great entrance if you're somebody wanting to go with a more witchy aesthetic. I think adding some candles that are floating would be such a great addition to this build, and then maybe it could lead up to your cottage. The next idea for today's build is going to require using the gourmet bowl glitch, and this one is pretty tricky to do at first, and it's going to require kind of figuring out where you want your tables to be. The first idea is going to have a more overgrown look to the water with the capital chic table, and it's going to be sunk further into the ground. But the positive about this means that it's going to be easier to place your rocks and greenery around the table to really hide the edge of it. But the negative I have with this is I don't like that all the grass goes through the water. I just think it ends up being a little too much for a really detailed build. But again, this all comes down to personal preference. So to sink the table, you're going to need 2 walls and an industrial shelf. And what we're going to do is essentially ghost the paver onto the ground. So you're going to originally start out by placing your paver onto the industrial shelf, then you're going to pick it up and bring it towards the ground directly below the industrial shelf. But instead of placing the paver immediately, you're going to grab an item in your hotbar, and this is going to cancel the placement because the game is going to think that you're placing this new item, and this paver will now be ghosted. Now that the paver is on the ground, I'm going to multi-select with Alt on my keyboard and grab with my mouse the bowl, and then what I'm going to do next is just drag the bowl and table and place it on top of the paver. Once you have your table on top of the paver, you're going to pick up the paver underneath the table and then just simply replace the entire item lot on the ground, and then your table will be sunken at your desired height. Keep in mind that I will be doing a slight adjustment later in this video in raising up the industrial shelf just a tad so my table doesn't sink into the ground that much, but I do notice that your shelf placement is going to affect how deep your table will sink, so just know it will take a few tries to get it exactly how you want it to be. Another thing I want to mention is, as you can see, you can notice my paver that I use to ghost and sink the table. There's actually a way to hide this, and you could go the easy way, which is just placing a bush, but my mistake was actually just user error. If you place the paver directly underneath the industrial shelf, you won't see it when you actually sink the table anymore. So if you want to avoid having a paver sticking out from your sunken table, make sure you do it this way. So after repeating this process a bajillion times, here's the rough draft shape of my river. A tip I have is to not stress too much about where your table placement is, because a natural river is not going to be a perfect line. So having these minor imperfections will actually add a lot more realism to your build. And the great thing about the table being sunken, as mentioned earlier, means that I'll be able to place the rocks up close to the tables. So for the next step, honestly, there's no set way to do this. I'm just going to rotate the rocks ever so often often and then fill in empty gaps with maybe some bushes. That way it's just not like a straight row of rocks. It kind of just adds a little bit more realism to the build. So you can definitely just do this whatever you think looks best. There's really no set way to it. And then I'm going to go ahead and transition to how this looks and get started on the cliffside terraform. So now that I have a general idea of how I want the pattern of my river border to look, we're going to go ahead and start on the terraform. I do want to quickly add that later in the video, you're going to notice that the grass in the water is completely gone. That's because I decided last minute, as mentioned earlier, I thought that the grass coming through was just a little too much going on. It was starting to take away from all the greenery and detail that I put into this build. So I raised up the tables just a little bit. That way it wouldn't clash too much with the overgrown look. Another thing I decided last minute was to touch base more on an idea we were actually testing on my update live stream that we just did, and that was by creating steps with the log bench and a bridge. So I ended up actually just adding this into the river because I thought having this bridge going across the river was such a great touch to the build. However, a huge negative with the log bench being a bridge is you're going to have to sink the first bench, kind of like what we did with the water, and then you'll be able to place each additional bench as normal on top of the tables. However, if you last minute decide to raise your water, you run into the issue where the bench will start having an issue with being placed on top of it, which means each additional bench will need to be sunk into the table, and this just becomes honestly so much more work than it needs to be. So go with the easy option, which I showcase at the end of this video by using the wall shelves, and you can just drag and drop them into place on top of the tables, just like what we do with the industrial shelf. Anyways, we're gonna finish working on the terraform and then we'll transition to how this second idea looks completely decorated, but I hope that the river brings you some much needed inspiration. So after spending literally all night last night placing trees and bushes, here is how the river looks completely decorated. This layout is definitely more on the expensive side because it uses a ton of rocks in Terraform, but I think it's a great theme in addition if you want to do maybe a campsite plot or maybe have this transition to an overgrown cottage. Another thing I absolutely love about this build too is the use of the bench being a staircase. I just think it adds so much character to the Terraform spots over here, and this is done by sinking the first bench into the ground just like how we did the capital chic tables for the water, and then you just place the second bench as normal on the ground. The last idea was inspired by Fleurs on YouTube, and it's this adorable little pond, and I think I'm going to surround it with some Terraform pieces. Using the same method for the capital chic tables that we did with the river, I just sunk some to create a circle-like shape to create this pond. And just like the river, we're going to surround it with a log, different types of rocks and flowers just to make it appear a little bit more natural. So after adding some final decorations and a pathway, here is how the pond looks. I think that this is such a great starter build if you don't have a bunch of money right now on Palia. There's honestly so many different ways that you could transition from this build, and I also think it could be a great addition if you prefer a more witchy aesthetic, if you added some candles to it, or this could just transition to another cottagecore like home. Another thing I decided was to add the koi pond over here, but I didn't realize that the grass was going to clip through like this, so I think I'm going to try to attempt to sink some capital chic tables inside of it. That way it matches with the pond better. But if you wanted to skip out on the koi pond, you could just continue the pathway that we have created. Anyways, I hope that all 3 ideas today brought you some much needed inspiration. Let me know your favorite one in the comment section below. Before today's video also ends, I just want to give a huge shout out to all of my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting me as a creator. Just your support in general means the world to me. Thanks again for watching and have a horrible day. I'll see you next video.